In a Violent Nature is today's review, and for me, this is one of the highlights of the year. I love the movie, especially as someone who's a big fan of slasher films, and in particular, the Friday the 13th films. This is just kind of an irresistible new film that really took me by surprise. You could call it, an art house slasher. You could call it a deconstruction, or yeah, you could call it just a good old fashioned slasher, but with a slightly different flavor. And I think all those descriptions would be accurate, though looking at it, from say the deconstruction angle, immediately you do kind of think of movies, like obviously like Scream or Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. Well, any number of movies. I mean, since Scream, I guess the deconstruction of the slasher has become pretty much a genre of horror, subgenre in and of itself. But this one, I mean, it's not really playing with the rules in, this, I don't know, meta, trying to be clever kind of way. Everything's really kind of set up for you. We have all the tropes. We have the burly killer with the tragic backstory, stalking the partying teenagers in the woods, and we have the ranger character who kind of knows the story and is on the tracks of the killer. The Loomis kind of character. If we're going by Leslie Vernon rules, then he would be called the Ahab character, right? We have kind of the relics that can kind of subdue the killer in some kind of way, and we also have the final girl. So we have all of that laid out before us in the movie, though it shows us this classic kind of slasher in a different way, where you could almost say that this is a movie from the killer's point of view. That's not exactly the case, though a lot of it is, but it is more kind of like a fly on the wall kind of movie where we are observing this. So basically, the attention brings us wherever the forces of the storytelling decides we need to be, which is really cool. And the movie in a way, it reminded me quite a bit of the Gus Van Sant film Last Days, where that we had, I mean, in essence it was a Kurt Cobain movie, his final days before his death. We have the character walking around in the woods kind of aimlessly, and these fly on the wall kind of moments, just kind of observing, where you almost want to see it as the anti rock and roll movie, where it's not really glorifying the rock star lifestyle and showing kind of a sort of like a pitiful death, but it almost can't resist it. So it does show the kind of stuff. It does show the sex and the drugs and the rock and roll, but in a different way. So that's kind of what we get here. So I mean, like in the same way that the Michael Pitt character in Last Days isn't really Kurt Cobain due to rights or whatever, but he pretty much is, right? So same way here, like this character, Johnny, I guess we can call him. He's not really Jason, but we can kind of say that he's Jason, right? And in the same way that we could almost classify it as an anti-slasher, obviously it does embrace all of the slasher elements, and in a pretty glorious kind of way, I would say. We have really, really impressive deaths in the movie. I mean, obviously, you can't talk about this movie without talking about the yoga death, which has become this infamous thing, right? Which is great, and it kind of brings me back to remembering what Tom Savini had said about horror movies, what he did particularly with the Friday 13th, where it's like a magic show, right? Where you're kind of tricked by this illusion of this ghastly murder, and you stop and think to yourself, how do they really do this? Like, I mean, there are some parts where you're like, okay, yeah, they probably use some CGI or whatever, but then other parts you're like, gee, I wonder how exactly how they did this. This is kind of an interesting presentation of this terrible murder. So I love that. I love being able to, this day and age, as an audience member, kind of wondered to myself how they actually pulled that off. So that was great. We have this killer again, very much like a Jason character. He's deformed underneath a mask. In this case, his mask is an old fireman's mask, because there's a whole kind of backstory with him as a child, and this fire tower, and falling off from there, and the revenge that was taken, and all that, and using these old firehouse tools for his murders, like especially these hooks, which he makes good use of, and when we kind of get to the conclusion of the film, I think it hits kind of at the heart of, well, I mean, in nature and dangerous killers and things like that. We have this whole great speech at the end by this Good Samaritan woman picking up the final girl, just kind of laying it all out for us, and we kind of get it. And we're like, oh yeah, okay, that's kind of cool. So they bring it all together in this wonderful way, and the movie really spoke to me. It really did, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I did kind of like how, in this case, as kind of like a tribute to the horror slashers of the past, it did it with this different take, but it also did it with a modern take. So this wasn't like an 80s throwback. It's very much a modern movie. We catch some of the characters talking about modern things, like, oh, you're going to get canceled for saying this. We have to tell this story in a different way, which is kind of good, kind of clever, but not too on the nose. The movie speaks for itself, and I can't see why the movie is somewhat divisive. It's gotten a lot of great reviews. A lot of people really appreciate it, and I'm absolutely one of those people. Though others are kind of like, well, I get what they're trying to do, but it's a little bit dull. It's not for me. We just see this character walking. Geez, it's almost like playing that Friday the 13th video game, but just, well, watching someone play it, basically. So I get that, but at the same time, as a movie that really lets you breathe in the atmosphere and have it kind of feel more like it is, your own experience, and being the fly on the wall, it does it so well. Like, I mean, it's a beautiful looking movie. It captures, the scenery of the woods in such a magnificent way that it is so absolutely beautiful. We have it actually in the classic Hollywood ratio, I guess they call it the 4:3, very purposefully, I would say, and it just looks great. I mean, the locations are wonderful. This was filmed in North Ontario, the Kawartha Lakes, Sault Ste. Marie. I mean, you could package this as a tourism video. It's so beautiful, so wonderful. So I love that. I love the visual nature of the film as much as I love, the titillating special effects, blood and guts, gore, slasher elements of it. So bring all that together, it's a unique beast, I would say. But at the same time, it's like, sure. This wouldn't be the kind of movie that you'd watch with a group of friends and have pizza and beer or something like that. In the same vein, you would have, a Friday the 13th marathon. Though that's not the purpose of the movie. It is, reflective in its own way, and asks a little bit of reflection on the viewer. Where you could certainly ask yourself, if I'm not really interested in seeing this killer walking through the woods, why exactly am I so interested in seeing the point of view of the teenagers in any number of these movies, where they're talking about just completely banal things like their sex lives and how much they're going to drink and all of that. So it bypasses that for the most part. Though again, the attention kind of veers where it's necessary to tell this story, and fills in the gaps that we haven't seen in those movies, that we never get the luxury of seeing, as the killer always appears as if out of thin air. Well, here we kind of get to see how the killer kind of comes to where he is at those points in the movie, which I thought it did very well. I thought it kind of did make you think of what happens kind of off the screen in the average kind of slasher movie. It's really, really wonderful. The movie was written and directed by Chris Nash, who, I could only imagine is a big fan of the Friday the 13th movies, and it certainly shows. The love and, most importantly, the reverence for those movies is illuminated in every frame. And with that respect for those movies, and truly the storytelling that you can find in them, presented in this way, I thought was just spectacular. I really did. I love the movie. A highlight, one of the year's best, in my opinion. I really loved it. So perhaps you might not feel the same, but that's up to you. So if you haven't seen it, definitely give it a look. And if you've seen it and maybe you have mixed feelings about it, check it out again. In watching it a second time, a lot is kind of more laid out, and kind of it pops out a little bit more at you, what the film is trying to say, and how it's trying to say it. So since you already know kind of the roadmap of the movie, kind of a second trip out, multiple trips out, are all the more enjoyable. So definitely something I'll keep going back to. Absolutely. So that's my review. In a Violent Nature. Check it out. We're doing 31 Days of Horror here on the channel. Spooky, scary horror movie reviews all throughout October 2024. So stay tuned for more as we're going through the month. Be sure to comment, rate, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you next time, and until then, stay scared.